Stangibelisco here to illustrate rather graphically the difference between a derecho and a hurricane. Derechos have often been called inland hurricanes or land hurricanes because of their nature. But there's one thing that they lack, and that is the extreme wind speed and structure of a true hurricane. But hurricanes often contain derechos. For example, here is a derecho within Hurricane Andrew. I remember at Miami Beach, where I lived, the sustained wind was 76 miles an hour. Here on Virginia Key, the sustained wind was 85 miles an hour. So that would, both of those qualify as hurricane force, but just barely. Derechos on the mainland occasionally do attain intensities of that sort. Here is another good example of a derecho. I don't know exactly what the wind speed was. My location at the time that this radar image was taken was right about at the front edge of the eye wall of the hurricane, Homestead, Florida. So it was probably about 4:30 a.m. on August 24th, 1992. And I remember we were watching this very image on a battery-powered television set because this derecho right here had knocked out the power permanently, and I do mean more or less permanently. It was up to 6 months before the power grid could be restored, just because it was completely wiped off the map like spider webs in the trees during a hurricane. Here is another example of a derecho within a hurricane. So you do find them. But the hurricane itself, the eye wall, is a beast of an entirely different species. While these derechos may contain sustained winds of around anywhere from 45 to 75 or 85 miles an hour, this hurricane contained a sustained wind of up to 145 miles an hour at that particular point in time. That's what they determined that it was. Since then, they've upgraded that a little bit to 165, just based on the extent of the damage that was done. Turkey Point is a nuclear power plant, and it was well equipped and dealt fully well with the force of this hurricane. But while a derecho may make a lot of noise and blow down a lot of trees, a hurricane sounds like a freight train going over the roof of your house, and it sounds, if your house continues to stand through the duration of the hurricane, which ours did, or my friends did, if it survives it, that's what it sounds like. It was nighttime, so I couldn't look outside and see what was actually taking place. But this is the hurricane. Note the perfectly closed, almost perfectly round eye wall, an almost perfect textbook hurricane. And again, I was right here. This portion of the hurricane, as the hurricane moved directly from east to west at 18 miles an hour, this portion right here lasted about 45 minutes. The eye lasted for about 1 hour. And this portion here, which was less violent, probably about 100 mile an hour sustained wind, as opposed to 145 over here. Turkey Point, I believe, recorded a 147-mile-an-hour sustained wind. Now remember, the gusts are generally 30 miles an hour higher than the sustained wind. So I went through not only the eye of the hurricane, but the center of the eye of this hurricane. And believe me, words fail me when it comes to a full description of the vividness of the sensation that accompanied this storm. Right here was the most intense wind of all, probably on the order of 150 or 160 miles an hour, but nobody really knows because all of the instruments to record wind speed were destroyed. This is the last image that was available from the National Hurricane Center right there at that plus sign before the radar dome was blown off of its roof. At that time it was in Coral Gables, Florida, and that was the end of those radar images, and from that point on we had to watch Palm Beach radar. But now, once we got an assurance that the house would survive, I just got exhausted and fell asleep for this part of the hurricane, the second part. That is the difference between a derecho, which are these rain bands as they're called, or I think sometimes they're kind of erroneously called feeder bands, and the hurricane itself, which comprises the eye wall. There's a huge difference not only in structure, but in the force and speed of the winds. So when you call a derecho an inland hurricane, you'd better be mighty careful. Once this thing got entirely inland, it was indeed an inland hurricane. But no derecho on the mainland has ever achieved intensity anything like this. Stan Gibilisco, signing off for now. Until next time, so long.